The Indian Rebellion of 1857. This major, yet unsuccessful uprising against the British East India Company led to the dissolution of the company and the transition to direct administration by the British Crown. What led to these events, and how did they transpire? To understand this, one must first know who the Sepoys were and what their roles were in the days of the company rule. Sepoy was the name given to locally recruited soldiers by the various European trading companies on the Indian subcontinent. They played an essential role in maintaining order on European settlements and were the main component of British forces in Asia, being the key factor for the British victories in India during the Seven Years' War.
In order to understand the Sepoy Rebellion, one must first understand the big picture causes of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. With the establishment of the East India Trading Company, many conflicts arose between the British Empire and the Indian people. Some of the first and most inflammatory actions by the British Empire were the various laws that they imposed on Indians restricting their culture. The British outlawed many practices that they considered Eastern or unorthodox. They also forced Christian conversions onto the Indian people. Furthermore, the British deployed many troops in the Indian subcontinent, which rightly angered many of the Indian locals. There were conflicts between British soldiers and local Indian people, which further exacerbated the increasingly strong anti-British sentiments among the Indian people. Within the British Army itself, many Indian soldiers employed by the British did not receive equal treatment among their British superiors. Many Indian soldiers did not receive equal pay, pensions, or promotions within the British military. There was also widespread racism and white supremacy within the British Army. These actions taken by the British led to discontentment among the Indian people, causing a widespread attempt at a revolution on the Indian subcontinent.
The Great Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Indian Mutiny, impacted the social, political, and economical status of the Indian people. Before the rebellion, new gunpowder cartridges made of cow and pork fat were introduced to the Sepoys, who were Indian soldiers under the rule of British power. This outraged the people because the Hindus believed the cow was a cherished symbol that was to be protected. The Sepoys teamed up with thousands of citizens to break down British power once and for all. Lack of respect, low pay, and racial discrimination affected the Sepoys' behavior by making them feel inferior to British control. With all that happened in the recent years, they felt used, and it was time to stand up and rebel. The Sepoys and accompanying citizens had motives of being released from British rule to gain independence. In order to be free, they had to stand up for what was right. Although the rebellion was ultimately unsuccessful, the news of the Indian Mutiny was spread throughout the land.
In India as a whole, there were about 4,000 Europeans in the company and royal armies, as compared with a total strength of about 300,000 Indian soldiers. The British had a slow response at first, for it took a time for troops stationed in Europe to reach India and to organize European troops already there. But eventually, troops from the Crimean War crossed through Persia, and some regiments on their way to China were diverted, while two columns left Meerut and Shimla on May 17th and started their march towards Delhi. Fighting and killing Indians along the way, they finally met the rebels west of Delhi on the 8th of June and drove them back to the city where the infamous siege now began. An attempt to enter the city through a breach in the Kashmiri Gate was launched on September 14th, and after a week, the British were successful in taking the city, and the soldiers looted, pillaged, and killed civilians in reprisal. Bahadur Shah, the soon-to-be last Mughal emperor, was arrested. Similar atrocities took place in Kanpur and Agra as reprisal. For some days before the retaking of Kanpur, around 200 European women and children had been massacred by the rebels. Kanpur became a turning point in the rebellion, where the anti-imperial and pro-Indian elements of the British public lost all their support. By 1858, the British would recapture Lucknow and Patna, where they discovered more crimes against civilians and committed some of their own. The rebellion would end where it had begun, at Jhansi. In March 1858, the city was recaptured, and while Rani had escaped, she was eventually killed during the Battle of Gwalior, most likely by a carbine shot. She would later become a Joan of Arc-like figure in Indian folklore to this day. On July 8, 1858, a peace treaty was finally signed and the rebellion had come to an end. Bahadur Shah was tried for treason at Delhi and sentenced to exile. He died in Burma in 1862, bringing the Mughal dynasty to a close. The rebellion also meant the end of the British East India Company, when in August 1858 the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act, and the administration was transferred to the British Crown. The Indian Office, along with the position of Secretary of State of India, were created. The Governor-General became the Viceroy of India, and in 1876, British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli offered Queen Victoria the title of Empress of India, with an official ceremony on January 1st, 1877. The more profound consequences of the rebellion can be seen in the reorganization of the Government of India. The British colonial administration stopped all attempts at westernization and Christianization. Land grabs stopped, and around 400 princely states remained untouched until Indian independence in 1947. Religious tolerance was decreed, and Indians were now allowed into the civil service, although only limitedly. But the aftermath can be simply summarized in a change of attitude from the British government. Does this then mean that the rebellion was successful? One could very well argue against that, since there never was a consensus among the rebels or mutineers, whatever you want to call them, as to what their goals were. With that in mind, a rebellion that involves civilian crimes and massacres on both sides can never truly end in success. But why did it fail though?
The failure of the Sepoy Rebellion was a combination of different dooming factors. The first and arguably most influential factor was the fact that there wasn't an ideal leader for the revolt. Even a leader such as Nana Sahib lacked enough military experience to successfully lead a rebellion. Another key factor was the lack of mass support among the Indians. While the revolt was popular among some, there was not enough manpower involved in the revolt to overpower the British Empire. Furthermore, many of the Sepoys had differing values and goals. In India, there was already a lack of unity among Muslims and Hindus. Finally, a dooming factor for the rebellion was the lack of support among the Indian principalities. Many of the Indian princes actively supported the British in suppressing the revolt, but while the First War of Independence failed, it does display the widespread discontentment among many Indians at the time.